Just to quickly introduce how Alif, Ailaan and RSPN came together, and maybe start with what Alif, Ailaan is. Several years ago, people within DFID and outside DFID and other donor organizations started to argue that education isn't necessarily just a pedagogy problem. It's not just a problem of enough chairs or tables or school buildings or teachers trainings. That, of course, education is a problem of all of these things, but it's fundamentally, at its base, it's a problem of politics, and that the politics around education in any country helps define whether that place will have good education outcomes or not so good outcomes. So this argument then culminated in DFID putting together this idea that there should be a kind of a political campaign that urges the national discourse in this country to be more concerned with education than it is currently. So what we were trying to effect from the get-go was a more interested national, subnational, and local sets of discourses and narratives that privileged education more than education was being privileged before. So not as a competition that education is more important than national security, or education is more important than health, or education is more important than rural microfinance, but that education is important and people can make their own decisions about how important it is, and that it should be on the table. So at the macro level, this was, I shouldn't say relatively easy, but in terms of conception, it is easier, because at the macro level, you go to the editor of Dawn, you go to the executive producer of Geo, you try to convince them, and they don't need convincing. They're educated people. They feel as passionately as any of us do. So they start giving education more coverage. So that national sort of canopy level stuff gets done. But when we thought about, and then subnational is also relatively easy in the sense you can go to these regional vernacular press outfits, and you can deal directly with politicians and parliaments at the provincial level. But when we thought about the local level, there's always only been really one sort of exceptional game in town, and that's been the rural support programs. And we tried to think of what we could do to convince the instruments available, the vast array of assets and the vast stock of social, and I believe, and we believed, and I think slowly but surely the RSPs are beginning to believe, also the political capital that's available to the array of instruments that the RSPs use and engage with. And in particular, we didn't know this when we were thinking about this, when we started the conversation, but the LSOs ended up being, the local support organizations ended up being kind of the pivot or the fulcrum through which we tried to work. So the relationship between Alif, Ailaan and the RSPs literally goes back to the very first day of Alif, Ailaan, because this question about local level engagement was one of the first questions that we asked. So in answering that question, we knew right away that we had to find a way to work with the RSPs. And unlike a lot of other sort of grant arrangements, this wasn't Alif, Ailaan sort of engaging RSPs. This was really, we saw it as, will the RSPs engage with us? Will they be interested in this kind of not service delivery work? Because we weren't going to do service delivery. We were going to use social mobilization for more social mobilization. That was kind of the broad amorphous concept. I'll just run through the project itself and some of the, fantastic, some of the outputs. Just to, since the slide is here, the campaign, as I said, was to put education closer to the center of the political conversation in the country. To what end? Really three things that we thought were not going to be particularly controversial. And the reason that's important is that anytime you engage in any conversation, you'll have people for and against the motion. So what we wanted to do was take out the debate element. So you'll notice that there's very important issues that we don't deal with, like curriculum and many other things. So the first is, because there's a constitutional obligation, and for no other normative reason, at least in terms of an argument, every child should be in school. So the universality of enrollment is very important. The second is, once they're in school, if the universality applies to kids from 5 to 16, then just getting them in the school during an enrollment campaign isn't good enough. You have to keep them there for the next 10 years. And then finally, when they're in school, what are they doing? Are they acting as manual labor for teachers? Are they getting beaten up by teachers? Are they being made dumber because of their engagement in those classrooms and those teachers? Obviously, we don't want that. We want them to actually be learning something. So enrollment, retention, and quality is kind of the simple, non-controversial, 100% everybody for it kind of agenda that we, and again, that was important not just because we're scared of controversies like curriculum, but also because when we're going to engage with a diverse array of rural support programs through the RSPN, then we'll need to bring something to the table that isn't going to contaminate or damage all the other work that the RSPs are doing. Because when we say political campaign, immediately people worry कि ये मतलब ज़्यादा पंगे तो नहीं शुरू कर देंगे, कोई ऐसी controversial चीज़ तो नहीं करेंगे जिससे जो बाकी काम है वो negatively affect होगा. So we didn't want to have, we wanted to have plus, 100% of the tent satisfied, everybody on board, and everybody moving together. In terms of the core audiences, I'm not going to go through I mean, you can see what's on the screen, but basically the campaign identified three really important core audiences. The first is parents themselves, and that's the most complex one, and I'll just explain why. The second is providers, and providers is not just teachers, but it's also the administrators that deliver the public sector system. So the EDOs and the DOs and the DEOs and the AEOs and all those various actors that are part of the administrative structure of the delivery of education in the public sector. And then finally, there's politicians. So there's the three Ps: parents, providers, and politicians. The reason the parents are the most complicated is because when we think of politicians, like I said earlier, we can go and engage with parliament, we can go to the party leaderships, we can go to the political party headquarters, we can deal with the executive, and in every way, we'll be dealing with somebody who's a political figure, so you're engaging with the politics. When we think about providers, it's a little more complex, but still there's a locus standi that unions enjoy, for example. So you can talk to the teachers' unions, you can also talk to other non-union teachers' groups. And of course, you can talk to administrators directly. You can go and deal with the Secretary of Education or the EDO in any given district, and suddenly you're interacting with the official or legitimate locus standi for that audience. But when we think about parents, it's very, very difficult because there's no parents' union. There's no parents NGO, there's no parents collective. And again, so this is how it links up to the RSPs, that without having a locus standi at the local level, you really didn't have any way of engaging this very vital institutional audience called writ large parents. So at the national level, you reach parents by doing a television ad or by working with a reporter on a story. But how do you do that at the local level? And that sort of, when we asked this question and we challenged ourselves and we challenged friends in the sector, repeatedly it kept coming down to the fact that we're going to have to sort of convince the RSPs to work with us somehow because they have the infrastructure and the stock of capital that's necessary for us to engage with them in the way that we want to. I already mentioned this constitutional obligation. This is Article 25A, which was introduced in 2010 as part of the 18th Amendment. And the project really, the way, I don't even like calling it a project. The sort of engagement with the RSPs then became structured around Article 25A. At the beginning, it was really, can we get people to be more aware that this is a constitutional obligation? And so it was very, very simple at the beginning. At the beginning, it was literally going through the LSOs, engaging with something called community resource people, who were people that were being trained through a collaboration between the RSPN and the various RSPs that were working on this, and getting them to feel like they were the local education activists that were responsible for that LSO or for a given union council. As it says here, there was 11 districts over the course of almost, Bashir